Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fourth week of Kaleidoscope. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of U3A, Tasmania, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, most of you may know about the Staff Club, but I've recently discovered that you can have lunch at the Staff Club, which is another option if you don't want to go to Lays and Bees Cafe. So just across the campus towards the Law Building. It's open from 8:30 Monday to Friday, and it's a lovely place to have lunch. Okay, now I am really pleased to introduce Ms. Lara Giddings, our speaker for this morning. Now, I don't think Lara really needs, a huge introduction. I think we all know that Lara was the 44th Premier of Tasmania from 2011 to 2014. And we also know that Lara remains the most recent Labor Premier in that time, so that's 14 years later. And Lara, of course, was the very first woman to occupy the position of Tasmania, Premier of Tasmania, and still remains the only woman to be the Premier of Tasmania. And can I say, Lara, I don't think either of those two accolades are going to be beaten anytime soon. Lara, of course, is the Executive Officer of the AMA, Tasmania, and has been since 2019. We had Lara present a Kaleidoscope last year, and we were so enthralled with Lara's presentation that we invited her back straight away, and she graciously agreed to come and talk to us specifically about gender, given that Lara has been the only woman to occupy the position of Premier. And we welcome Lara. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for that warm welcome, and it's wonderful to be back here again. Last time I spoke a little bit more off the cuff because it was a broader discussion around my career and where I've been, where I came from, all of that side of it. But today I'm going to use my notes just a little bit more because of the sensitivity, in a sense, around the topic even of talking about gender in this world where part of our community will say there's no issue and another part of the community might realise that there is an issue still around the gender factor. And I think Kathy saying what she just said proves it to me too, to some degree, that we have not had a female Premier since I was Premier 14 years ago, and it doesn't look like we're going to have one anytime soon. Which very much reminds me of the case of, in fact I think it's in my speech, I'll try to not say it twice, but it fits here, when I door knocked after Julia Gillard had lost her election, and I had a constituent say to me, oh thank God we've got rid of her, we'll never have another female Prime Minister ever, she was such a disaster. And I stood there on the doorstep and said, so you're telling me there's been no male disasters before? Mind you, of course, I didn't agree with him that she was a disaster anyway, but that thinking in itself, that gender is still such a powerful force in the way we view so much of what happens, not just in politics, but in life generally. So I do want to reflect a bit on that in my the contribution today, and then I'll have time for some questions, and that's my favourite part, I have to say, is when people challenge me a bit with what I've said and we can have a bit more of a conversation about it. But in this, I don't pretend to have all the answers. There are no answers to a lot of it, but it is important that we talk about it or nothing will change. And what is interesting for me is, yes, I was the state's first female Premier, but I was also the state's first female Treasurer. No one talks about that significant role as a first. I'll come back to that. But becoming Tasmania's first female Premier was indeed a great honour. And being the first does carry a bit of weight, and that weight in some respects won't be lifted until we start seeing the second and the third and the fourth, and it becomes just the norm. as we see in leadership in other parts of our community where we don't talk about firsts with women anymore. When you are the first, you're not just doing the job, you're also very much aware that people are watching what your appointment means. And for some women and girls, it's a moment of possibility for them. If they see a woman succeeding, they feel empowered themselves and say to themselves, well, perhaps I can do it too. For others, there's the curiosity, there's the scepticism, or simply the novelty of seeing a woman in a role that has always been held by men. Being first means that you're judged both as an individual and unfairly at times as a representative of your gender. If a male leader makes a mistake, it's usually just seen as a mistake. If a female leader makes a mistake, there can be a tendency for people to ask whether women are suited to leadership. And this is the extra burden that women in leadership still carry. Julia Gillard's experience showed us that gender does not explain every criticism of a woman leader, but it often shapes the way that criticism is expressed. She was criticised as Prime Minister, and all Prime Ministers are, but it was about her voice, it was about her appearance, her latest hairstyle, it was about her family choices. It was the fact that she had no fruit in her fruit bowl when she had the media take a photo of her in her own kitchen. It was about her tone. It was the legitimacy as a woman in power, and all of that was made part of the public debate. And perhaps most tellingly, when she called out sexism, she was accused of playing the gender card, which is itself one of the ways women are discouraged from naming up the bias that still exists. Her misogyny speech remains powerful because it named what so many women in leadership recognise, that sexism often operates in plain sight, and women are punished both for experiencing it and for calling it out. Jacinda Ardern's experience reminds us very much of a similar truth. Gender does not explain every criticism of a woman leader, but it often shapes the form that criticism takes. Her journey is so well portrayed in her documentary Prime Minister, and if you haven't seen it, I would strongly recommend that you view it. It shows very much the human cost of leadership. She led through extraordinary crises while also carrying public expectations around motherhood, empathy, kindness, security, strength, and composure. She was the subject of horrific attacks and a sit-in by anti-vaxxers that was taken over really by the far right in New Zealand, the anti-establishment, who sat for months outside of the Parliament House in Wellington, which in the end was broken up and formed a riot, which I don't recall happening. It was all during that COVID time, but I don't recall it being on our media quite the way it's portrayed as she experienced in New Zealand. But like Julia Gillard before her, Ardern showed that women leaders are often required to carry both the burden of decision making and the burden of being interpreted through gendered expectations. Now for me, one of the strongest lessons I learned is that leadership is lonely. Until you're up at the top, and Kathy would know this now as president of U3A, you don't fully really understand just how lonely it is to be the leader, to be at the top. You are surrounded by people, good people, loyal people, experienced people, people who have your back, people who are offering you advice, providing you with the briefing notes, judging, providing you an opportunity to test your political judgment before you go public with it. And there's a lot of support, but ultimately when you're the Premier, you are the final decision maker. Even as Deputy Premier, I had no idea how lonely it felt to actually be the Premier. There are decisions where no option is perfect. There are decisions where every path will hurt someone. There are decisions where you have incomplete information, intense pressure, and very little time to make them. And at the end of the day, though, you are the person who must ultimately make the decision. And you are the one who has to then live with those consequences. That is one of the realities of leadership that is not always visible from the outside. People see the announcement, they see the media conference, they see the decision. They don't always see the weight that came with carrying that decision. And added to this, women in leadership are often judged through a different lens. A man who is decisive may be called strong. A woman who is decisive may be called difficult. A man who is consultative may be seen as thoughtful. A woman who is consultative may be seen as unsure. A man who shows emotion may be seen as human. A woman who shows emotion may be seen as just simply not tough enough. These double standards are not always explicit. Often they sit beneath the surface in expectations about how leaders should look, sound, and behave. For women, there can be a constant balancing act. Be strong, but not too strong. Be warm, but not too weak. Be ambitious, but not too threatening. Be confident, but not too arrogant. And that balancing act takes a lot of energy. And it's one reason that representation matters. The more women are seen in leadership, the less each woman has to carry the full weight of that form of expectation. But it's also important to recognise that bias is not always conscious. People may not set out to treat women differently, but still do. They may respond differently to authority depending on whether it comes from a man or a woman, and they may hear the same words differently depending on who says them. And to me, this was very evident within the cabinet room, where a woman would come up with an idea and the men would then take on that idea and make it their own. The decision would be made based on the male who made the second or the third opportunity to raise that idea. It would be great, idea, Michael, great, idea, John, that sort of thing. And you think, but hang on, it was actually Margaret or Paula or Fran or someone else who came up with it, not John or whatever. But the difference I also found, and in fact women, I know this around other tables too, board tables and the like, where this is a problem, women go out of their way now to actually say, gee, that was a great idea, Margaret. It was really good that you came up with it. Or wonderful idea there, Jane. And that is when women support women and can be very powerful when it does work well. The other experience I had of the gender difference was around that cabinet table. Men tended to speak a lot. They loved it, the sound of their own voices, I have to say. But women, when they heard the point that they wanted to make, they didn't go ahead and repeat it. They would say, well, my point's been made, I don't need to speak now. So the voice of women did not always translate to be as loud as that of men in that room. And of course, I should say too that bias is not only about gender, that bias can also be about race, ethnicity, class, age, accent, disability and background. And leadership is still too often judged against an old, narrow image of what authority is meant to look and also what authority is meant to sound like. One of the more complicated truths is that gender bias is not always men against women. Women can support women powerfully, as the example I've just given. But women can also judge other women harshly, compete with them, or reinforce the same expectations that hold women back. And again, I experienced this in politics. Some women were extraordinary in the way they supported and lifted others. And I do have to point out the former Senator Margaret Reynolds here has been one of those women, as well as people like Fran Bladel and Joan Kerner, who really stood out to me as women who went out of their way to encourage other women into public life and leadership. And in fact, Margaret has published books about women in power and the role women play in politics. These women have understood that representation matters. And they were the ones who would put the ladder out to help you climb up, but reach out to you to help you succeed. But I also experienced the other side of politics, where some of my greatest rivals, even though I wasn't actually looking for the competition, was other women and other women in my team. And I always found that difficult and unsettling in a sense, because I felt, how are we going to succeed women if we're pulling each other down? Because then the men are like, well, what's the point? They can't even support each other in that sense. And you have the competitive men that exploit some of that as well for their own power and gain. So sometimes systems that have limited space for women do really create that competition between them. And if there is only room for one woman at the table, women can be pitted against each other rather than creating a situation where you make the table bigger. And that is why these sorts of lectures, these sorts of discussions are really important, because that's how you change culture. It's not enough to have women in leadership. We need leadership cultures that encourage women to support each other, make room for each other, and recognise that other women's success is not our own personal failure. At its best, women supporting women can be one of the most powerful voices and forces in leadership. And I see that now in my role in the AMA, where I head up an office of 4 other women, and we are a brilliant team. We work so well together, very supportive of each other, and no competition, none of that angst that can come. And we really work hard to support each other and understand the pressure each of us are in, and that kind of support makes a huge difference. When we don't support each other, it can be particularly painful. That doesn't mean that women should always agree with each other. Of course there will be disagreements, and that is healthy. Disagreement is part of our leadership, and it's part of a robust democracy. But there is a difference between disagreement and undermining, between challenging another woman's ideas and diminishing her place at the table. Recently, this isn't just, as I said, experienced in politics. As recently, I had a female doctor reflect to me that she also perceives this gender difference in her work. She sees patients and nurses respond differently when a male doctor enters the room than when they listen to her as a female doctor. So it's not necessarily because anyone consciously decided that the male doctor was more capable, but the atmosphere also shifted. The authority of the male doctor was accepted far more quickly, and the conversation changed. So I think we as women need to recognise this, because this is also about how women respond to men in helping to drive that culture within a framework like that described by this female doctor. You can have the same qualifications, you can have the same title, the same responsibilities and the same expertise, but women still have to work harder to establish authority. And that is exhausting. And it matters because leadership is not just about having the title, it's also about whether others allow you to exercise the authority that comes with that title. But this is where unconscious bias can be so powerful. People may believe they are being fair, but they may still interrupt women more often. They may still question women's judgment more readily. They may still expect women to do more of the emotional labour. They may still describe the same behaviour differently depending on whether it comes from a male or a female. So we need to become more conscious of those patterns if we're going to change them. And that's being conscious in ourselves as well. I think I might have used this story the last time I spoke to you about that situation about a situation of an emergency department, and a patient gets rushed in on a trolley, and the doctor looks down at the patient and says, "I can't operate, that's my son." And unconscious bias means most of us have in our mind a male emergency doctor, when in fact it's the mother who's looking at her son, a female doctor. And I remember when I was first told that, because I always thought I don't have any unconscious bias, I'm one of these women out there fighting the cause. And yet I also went to that male doctor image in my head. So challenging ourselves, challenging even our own beliefs where we think we might be on the left of feminist politics and still realise that we are also carrying unconscious bias is really important. Now, one of the things I've reflected on over time is how political legacy is also remembered and how gender can shape that too. Joan Kerner is remembered for a polka dot dress she never even owned. Never wore a polka dot dress, but a cartoonist dressed her in one and it became her legacy. It was a way that cartoonist was able to portray Victoria's first female premier as a frumpy suburban housewife rather than as a serious political leader. I am often remembered as Tasmania's first female premier, and I am very proud of that. It was an honour and it mattered symbolically. But as I said at the beginning, I am less often remembered as Tasmania's first female treasurer. And I'm also guilty of that. It's only that a week ago I was talking, no, not even a week ago, I'm getting my own old age dementia now. Yesterday, I spoke to someone who's asked me to speak about leadership to a group of women that she's pulling together, and she said to me, do you realise, Lara, that you were the state's first female treasurer? So, well, now you say that, yes, but I never ever even think of what an honour that was and how important it was. And the fact we have not had a female treasurer either for the past 14 years. And that matters to me because the Treasury role was not symbolic. It involved rebuilding a responsible and sustainable budget after a global financial crisis, making very difficult decisions that helped keep Tasmania out of net debt. And you only have to look at what's happening now, the crisis we are in now, to see what happens when you don't make those decisions at the right time and you quickly get into a position where you are now spiralling out of control with net debt and having to spend far too much money just on interest payments alone. Not on the health system, not on the schooling system, not looking after Tasmanians, purely giving money across to banks that you have borrowed money that you couldn't afford to borrow. Essentially is the state we're in. These choices that you make are not always popular. Budget repair rarely is. It does not come with a ribbon to cut. It does not produce a shiny new building or ring true in a simple slogan. Often the value of responsible financial management is in what does not happen. The debt avoided, the risk reduced, the future burden that was not passed on. That work really matters, but it doesn't ring true to the public. It doesn't last as a legacy. In fact, I rarely hear, ever, the media talk about the Giddings government, ever. I see at times Saul Eslake will go back to that period of time and put the figures up on a slide in some of his public lectures, but he never talks about the role of Lara Giddings as the treasurer, who caught the political heat of making those tough decisions at that time. And yet there is no legacy for any of that. One of the gender dimensions of legacy is that women are often remembered for being first, while men are more readily remembered as the strong economic managers. As I said, I was the first female treasurer, as well as the first female premier, and yet that part of the story is rarely told. By contrast, male leaders are often given the mantle of economic authority much more easily. They are described as disciplined, decisive, financially and fiscally responsible, even when later decisions or later budgets tell a far more complicated story. I do not raise this to diminish anyone else's service. I raise it because it tells us something about how leadership is remembered. Women's leadership is often framed around identity, personality, or novelty. Men's leadership is more often framed around authority, competence, and economic stewardship. That is why it is important for women to tell the full story in and of their leadership times, not just talk about the symbolic milestones, but the hard decisions, the technical work, the reforms, the budgets, the negotiations, and the responsibility carried. Leadership is not only about what you announce or what you build. Sometimes it is about the risks you prevent and the future costs that you avoid. One of the aspects I noticed about the difference in women and male leadership is also how they approach the role. And I think I started to touch on this last year a bit as well, that I've seen with men that they glide through leadership a lot more easily. And this is a generalised comment, of course, and there are no doubt the weight of leadership sits very heavily on the shoulders of Anthony Albanese, for instance. But they seem to be much more confident and able to see the big picture, to take that helicopter view of what is required, to be able to talk about that vision much more easily. Because what I've perceived and seen with women in leadership is that for two reasons, we go into the reeds. We cross every T, we dot every I. Partly because that's how we run our lives. We are the ones, generally speaking, writing out the shopping list, whether we do the shopping or not. We are the ones looking to see if there's enough toilet paper in all the various toilets in the house. Those are the things we do. We are looking at the detail all the time, and we run those homes whether we like it or not. And it's generalised, no doubt there'll be someone here who says, my husband does it, I don't. So I accept that too, but generally speaking, that's what we do. We also do it in leadership because we feel for right or wrong that we are being judged. And that if we say something wrong, or if we haven't got across that issue, we haven't read that paper, that we will be judged poorly and harshly if we say, oh, I didn't see that, oh, I don't know about that. Or if we stumble into saying the wrong thing, we will be judged harshly. So we go out of our way to be across every briefing note. We go out of our way to listen to all the advice so that we can come across as being an expert. Whereas I have seen men hardly read a briefing note and they have the confidence of an expert. And nobody judges them. I often say, you can wear whatever you like in this day and age as long as you wear it with confidence. Now, unfortunately, that means we've now seen women turn up naked to movie premieres and festivals, which is not what I'd like to see happen, but it is so true. Whatever, if you walk into any room, you could be in a Gucci, Versace outfit, but you don't look confident, you won't carry the room. You can walk in rags, and if you look confident, you will carry the room. So for us women, I think we have to recognise that as both a strength and a failing. And we must stop always being in the detail. We must stop believing we have to cross every T and dot every I to be a strong and effective leader. We do have people around us who can do that. I may have admitted this last year, but I was the first treasurer of the state. You heard that 3 or 4 times. I'm also someone who can't count. And I was quite frightened when I was told, you're going to get the treasury role. I said, but I can't count. I'm hopeless at maths. Please don't ask me to do that. And they said, Lara, you don't need to be able to count. You've got 142 staff employed in the Treasury Department who do that for you. So that again is the difference. I felt I had to be across every number in those budget papers, and I didn't. And that was a sense of freedom for me and a good lesson for me in terms of female leadership and that innateness of thinking that I have to be able to prove myself. And to be honest, I did. When I first took over the economic development portfolio, a young woman in my early 30s in a very male traditional portfolio of big business, heavy enterprise, through to your small businesses, I had to walk with confidence into those rooms and talk with confidence to those men. Because if I didn't have confidence in myself as that economic development minister, how on earth could they have confidence in me? Now, in terms of the scrutiny aspects as well, women in public life are often scrutinised in ways that men are not. You know, what you wear, how you speak, whether you smiled, whether you sounded too firm, whether you looked tired, whether you seemed warm enough. All of these elements are criticized. And certainly I only refer to Julia Gillard again to talk about just how much she was scrutinised. Jacinda Ardern experienced a different but also related version of it. She was praised very much for her empathy and her kindness, but those same qualities were sometimes used to question whether she was strong enough, as though compassion and strength could not exist together. As Premier and Treasurer, I wanted to be judged on the work, the decisions, the policy, the values, the outcomes, but I also knew that presentation and perception mattered. One of the leadership lessons is learning not to let that scrutiny define you. You listen where there is something useful to learn, but you cannot lead if you are constantly trying to make yourself acceptable to everyone. And I think in that too, it's so important to remain true to who you are. Early in my political career, I had a very wonderful woman with the best of intentions who thought that I was far too daggy in the way that I dressed, and she was going to take me shopping. She spent $2,000 of my money dressing me in clothes that she felt were far more powerful and would be a far better appearance than me. I never wore them. They just weren't me. So you have to also stay true and authentic to who you are. I think also you have to learn, in a key leadership lesson is learning to hold your ground without losing yourself. There will always be pressure to become harder, more defensive, more cynical, and politics especially can reward combativeness. But leadership should not require you to abandon your empathy. The strongest leaders I have known are those who never doubt themselves. They are the ones who can still listen, they can absorb criticism, they can make decisions and still remain decent human beings. And for women, there can be that pressure to prove toughness, but toughness does not have to mean becoming harsh. It can mean persistence, clarity, discipline, and courage. Jacinda Ardern often speaks about leading with kindness, and some people mistook that for softness. But kindness in leadership can require enormous strength. It means staying connected to humanity while carrying responsibility. And no leader gets everything right. One of the hardest lessons is learning to survive criticism, not ignore it entirely, but not be destroyed by it either. Some criticism is fair, some of it is politically motivated, some of it is personal, and some of it is just wrong. The challenge is working out which parts of that criticism contain a lesson you need to learn and what of that criticism can be left behind. Resilience is not about pretending things do not hurt. They do hurt. Resilience is about continuing to function, continuing to lead, and continuing to care despite that hurt. So by speaking to young women today thinking about leadership, I would say do not wait until you feel completely ready. That will never happen. And most men don't do so either. They go ahead regardless. Do not confuse confidence with competence. You may already be far more capable than you think. Find women or find people who will tell you the truth kindly so that you can grow as a person. And look for women who will lift other women up. And be one of those women yourself. Know your values. Do not let criticism make you feel small. Do not think you have to lead like a man to be more effective. And remember that leadership does not have to look like the model you inherited. You can make it your own and lead in your own way. So does it matter to have a female leader? I think it still does. I think it's important in terms of our community that we have the balance of men and women around the table. The most successful tables are those that have that balance right. And you will see that nowadays in the research that is done around boards. Those businesses that have the balance of men and women are far more successful. We have different skills. We have similar skills. Bring them together. We're a dynamic team. And it matters as much in politics as it does in business. We see the world differently, we ask different questions, we have different priorities, we have different instincts. bring them together, it makes a democracy so much stronger. So in closing, then Tasmania's first female Premier and Treasurer was one of the greatest honours of my life. It was also difficult, it was demanding, and there were tears at times. I recall very much through the terrible crisis of the breakdown in the forest industry, standing at my Premier's window looking down at the grounds of Parliament House and seeing just many, many distraught people from the forest industry protesting against us. And both Brian Green and I stood there together, both of us with tears in our eyes, because we knew the decisions we were making were being forced on us by forces outside of our control. Economic forces coming from around the world, decisions being made by the Japanese and by the Chinese, totally outside of our sphere of influence, that this restructure of the forest industry was going to happen whether we liked it or not. And we were lucky that we had an Australian government who was willing to pump in hundreds of millions of dollars to help that restructure happen. But tell that to the truck driver who won't have a job tomorrow, won't have money to feed his family tomorrow. Tell that to the wife who may well be frightened about her husband coming home and the family violence she's had to deal with, and the drinking she will now have to deal with more because he no longer has a job. And I tell that to the family business that has for generations supported their family through their small saw logging mill that is now going bust. You can't tell that story, and when you try to explain, this is not us being anti-you or anti your livelihood, anti your jobs. This is a restructure that is coming through forces beyond our control, and we're trying to help you through it. We're trying to give your family a future. The two are almost incongruent for people to understand. So there were days like that where people thought we were driving an agenda that was deliberately trying to shut down an industry, when we were literally standing in the Premier's office with tears looking at those people below and copying the phone calls of suicidal people in our office. It was a tough, tough time. So leadership is tough, but you don't stand up and do it if you're not prepared to be able to face the bad times as well as face the good times. Such as sitting next to the now King of Denmark at the cricket and realising I really was sitting next to Hobart. So there was also extraordinary moments like that, or meeting the now King of England, or King of Great Britain, I should say, King Charles, and being able to tell him we share the same birthday. So some lovely, positive, nice things to leave you thinking about, as well as some of the toughness and the hardness of being a leader. So I hope I've mentioned some interesting things there for you. Please bring on some questions. As I said, my favourite part.
How wonderful. We've got about 25 minutes of question time.
As a man, I'm tired of the world being run by bald, grey-haired old men. Or a toupee wearing nutter on the other side of the world. However, when you get people like Paul and Francie, it destroys the image that I would like to have of women in power. It's frustrating to see our news services not challenging these people in any way whatsoever, and in fact tearing down the people that we need in power. I remember Julie Bishop, when the Liberal Party lost the election. I could tell that she was thinking of becoming leader of the Liberal Party, and that was stopped by the bald-headed grey old men. As a Labor voter, I probably would have voted for that woman, because I was always impressed by the way she carried herself in foreign lands. My question is, how do we stop this social media destruction of the power of the world?
Just an easy one.
It's the hardest one of all, and I think it keeps a lot of people up at night, including me, when I go through social media. And what worries me too about the social media is the algorithms that pump out the information I want to see. So if you look at my Facebook site, I don't see a lot of that. It's fantastic. I've got all of these left-wing people, Greens, Labour, Teals, whatever, saying how shocking Trump is, how shocking Hanson is. Brilliant stuff. And I'm thinking, thank God they're out there. There are good people out there putting the counter up to what we're seeing coming out of Pauline Hanson. But unfortunately, if I was on a pro-Pauline Hanson site, my algorithm would all be about how brilliant she is, how these naive, stupid ideas she's got are the best ideas ever, and all we need is for Pauline and her monoculturalism to come in and everything would be great again. So social media is difficult, and I think we're all still finding our way. What we're seeing with government now, and government is slow, government is often the follower, not a leader. Even radical reformist governments can be followers, not leaders. And what we're seeing with government today is that they are trying to catch up now within really the digital revolution that we have been living through, which is now moving into an AI digital revolution, which everything has its pros and its cons. And we're only now seeing governments leading here in Australia being picked up around the world around social media and young people, for instance, pulling back some of these platforms from under 16-year-olds. Now, it's hard to do and it's only semi-successful, but it's better than government doing nothing at all. Government is now starting to hold parliamentary inquiries or pursue legal actions through the courts that are seeing people like Mark Zuckerberg himself have to turn up and present evidence, whether it's to the Congress in the US or whether it's through the courts around the world or his Meta representatives. Only yesterday, listening to news radio, they were talking about the Meta representatives in Australia fronting, I think it was a Senate inquiry. So there will be change, there will be people who are far smarter than me, who will be able to listen and no doubt are already ahead of you and I in terms of the thinking around how we come up with answers to the questions you just said. It is difficult, and I think also bringing it to the gender topic in a sense, there will be good women leaders and there will be shocking women leaders. There will be good male leaders and there will be shocking male leaders. So I think what's important is let's forget that Pauline Hanson is a woman. Let's forget that Donald Trump is a man. Let's just look at who they are as people and the tribe that both of them are espousing and the danger that comes with that.
Lara, thank you very much for a lovely presentation and your contribution to the state, which has been outstanding, so thank you very much. Firstly, a quick comment, and then a really difficult question following on from that one. Firstly, the comment is your image of Joan Kerner is not mine. Mine is her in leathers doing Joan Jett on far more favourable image of what was and I can't get that out of my head. But the big question is, we've got an adjudicated rapist, voted by 75 million Americans, to lead a country that supports disgusting humans like the Tates and others and the manosphere. So it's not just about social media, it's about how that, which is strong influence, but how it shaped those young men and boys with this really toxic masculinity. And it is really, truly horrific. And I don't know what any of us can do to help with that, but I think we've all got to keep pushing back on it. But any ideas you've got on how we can help young men and boys be more positive and avoid the horror of some of the things that are coming out?
Yeah. Again, a really important question there, and this sort of thing troubles me a lot and spend a lot of time thinking about it, because in my post-political career, I married a man who already had 4 children, three of whom are now, or two boys who are 19, a girl who's 15, another boy who's today turned 11, and our shared child who's 8. So that this world that you're talking about is very much something at the forefront of my own thinking. How do we make sure our young men don't end up in the manosphere? And to be honest, I don't know how we've managed it with the 2 young men we have in our household, because we have no idea really. Even as involved parents, we have no idea what they're seeing on YouTube. We have no idea what they're looking at on their algorithms with their Facebook, etc. We have no ability to control that. And I think that is why, for me, seeing government starting to step into this space and to be that paternalistic, maternalistic, whatever you want to say, body in our lives is so important. And it's why politics is so important. It is why rules, regulations and laws are so important. Because a free-for-all, which is pretty much what we've had for the last decade or more when it comes to the social media, you end up allowing these destructive forces to gain oxygen that they otherwise would not have. Another philosophical view and a topic that I love chewing the fat over with my husband is also the role of religion. And I'm not a practicing religious person at all in that sense, but I do look at the old systems we used to have where most of us were Catholic or Protestant or whatever we did. We turned up to church every Sunday and we listened to the priest or the father preaching to us about the rights and the wrongs of adultery, the rights and wrongs of stealing, the rights and wrongs, putting the values around our behaviour. And we had that. We would go to hell if we did the wrong thing. And our hell was obviously happening for some people with some of those priests themselves if they were being abused. So I'm not saying that is a perfect answer, the perfect world, but we have lost those structures. We don't have a place that we go to on a regular basis as a group of a community to have reinforced in us. What are the values that mean something to us in this community? So in this world now that is so global with the internet, that children now, young people are watching what idiotic behaviour is being done in London, New York, Paris, Tel Aviv, and they're saying, well, then we can do it here too. But the social breakdown we're seeing is actually, I think, quite harmful and worrying. And there is a view with, I think, our younger people, they don't accept authority like they used to. They don't respect authority like they used to. And you only have to go into our shopping centres now. Every time I go into Coles or Woolworths, I will see someone, generally young people, running around putting the donuts in with the baby nappies. Putting mixed meat in with some other part of the shop. So they spend their days going around having to collect all of this food that's just been spattered and splattered around the shop. It's just antisocial behaviour. It's nothing more than that. Children not turning up to school. I'm very aware of this. In the high school around our area, children who should be at school at 10 to 9 in the morning are turning up at 9:30, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock by choice if I go to school. We don't have those levels of structure that we once had, and that causes me concern as to where we're going. For some people it's fantastic, they hate structure. They don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to be told they have to wear a helmet when they go on their bicycle. They find that intrusive. There's even those who don't like having to put their seatbelt on because that's intrusive. And they should have a choice in life. So you've got that extreme, but what I'm worried about is the middle ground has shifted a lot, and social media has a big part to play, as does the breakdown of these other structures, including, for me, I would say, the breakdown of our organisations. So we put religion and churches aside, political parties. How many people here formally belong to any political party and pay a portion of their income on a regular basis to a political party? Very few. How many now are involved in sporting clubs and actually are paid up members of tennis clubs, cricket clubs, football clubs? All of these structures that were important in terms of providing mentors, providing other leaders for our young people, they've disappeared, or they're disappearing.
Lara, I'm going to ask a question now. During your time as Premier, did you feel you had an added responsibility or a want to do more for women? And do you think, if you did you achieve that?
Yes, of course. I also was part of a time where we did make some significant progress. So it wasn't all driven by me personally, but I was very happy to be part of it and supportive of it. So Judy Jackson, for instance, bringing in the family violence legislation initially, that was groundbreaking legislation. And what I really liked about it was it provided a framework predominantly for women who are predominantly the victims of family violence, but it was written in a way that recognised that actually men can also be victims of family violence. So for me, it was really important that we were there providing the structures to support women, but it wasn't done in a way that was gendered and then created another group of victims who then had no voice. So that was a proud moment that I was part of. The terminations legislation that we took through as well, making sure that terminations were not part of the criminal code and that women who sought a termination were not going to be victimised. That was a significant moment. That was driven by Michelle O'Byrne, for instance, and I was very pleased to be able to support the work of Michelle. So, and a lot of the work we did in the community, one of the areas I loved supporting was our neighbourhood houses. Again, predominantly driven by women in the community, predominantly used by women, but not solely by women. It was a safe place for men and women, and I was very proud of what we were able to do in supporting our community as well.
Well, a comment and a question, I suppose. So I'm wondering about what's happening with AI itself, not just social media, and because it's scraping male histories and whatever, that it actually has its own bias. So that's the comment. The other issue is recently, as this week, I work as a career coach, or partially now, semi-retired. So it's recently this week, a woman rang up, and it's fairly common, and the question is, I'm not very good at interviews. And it's always a little bit of an undersell for what is often a huge talent. So what do you see as a way forward in terms of increasing the amount of mentorship so that people can actually go to an interview on an even ground?
Okay. Look, two things just very quickly on your comment on AI. I absolutely agree with you. In fact, I had an interesting discussion with ChatGPT, which I think I spoke about last year, where I challenged it about who was Lara Giddings as Premier, tell me about her. It was pretty negative. It was awful. And so I challenged it with, but what about this? She did this, she said that, she managed this, and it by the end came, well, actually, on a balanced view, yes, you're right. Things. Thank you, ChatGPT. So I absolutely agree with you. This friend person who's asked me to help her on her next leadership course, she was the one who went to ChatGPT and said, who was Lara Giddings and, has Tasmania ever had a female treasurer before? And ChatGPT came back with no, Tasmania's never had a female treasurer. So she challenged it. So I agree with you, AI does have a gender bias in there. And it is important we all get on there and challenge it and have some fun doing it, because we're going to help educate AI by doing that. I'm also quite frightened about where AI could take us to. Now, the second part of your question, you just have to remind me now.
It's just about sort of how we mentor.
Confidence, the mentor. Okay, so for my perspective in this, I think women are their own harshest critics, probably more so than men. And even myself, I have to challenge myself where a leadership position will come available and I'll say, can I do it? Can I really do it? Will I be able to do it? And it is important for women that we articulate that fear, because we will then get the positive reinforcement we need back, and I think we actually do need it. So when I was Deputy Premier and I was told it's likely that David Bartlett's going to resign, you are likely to step up into the Premier role, my reaction to my Chief of Staff was, well, I can't be Premier. I'm not good enough to be Premier. I'm not smart enough to be Premier. You know, I can't think quickly enough to be Premier. And he was like, of course you can, Lara. Of course you can. You just have to believe in yourself. You can do it. So having him reinforce in me that actually an outside person could see that I had enough talent to be able to perform the role helped me step up. And yes, I could perform it. Yes, I did do it. I'm very proud of what I did, but I had a lot of self-doubt. And I think a lot of women have that. So for women, it is important to articulate what is their strength and say, you've got to believe this. I see it in you. You need to see it in yourself. And if you can build that confidence will come across. People love confidence. That's why they love Trump. You know, the rapist and all of that, we scratch our head. He comes across as arrogant, confident, a strong leader to that group in the American society, of which there are roughly 50% dropping down, thank goodness, into the 40s and hopefully into the 30s. But they love it. You think, how? So the power of self-belief is critical.
Yes, Lara, I want to ask you about gender and identity politics, because much of our careers we've put a great deal of focus on ensuring that women are out there asserting their rights and their talents and their ability to do things. But more and more we look around at all the different groups that have to be taken into account, and you only have to get a form to see you have to categorise where you fit in giving information about yourself. And I guess many of us are troubled by this, because on one hand we want everybody to be recognised and to be valued for who they are and who they want to be. But on the other hand, we seem to have lost that we're all human, we're all diverse, we all like different things, because identity politics seems to be replacing a more, social politics, if you like. How do you respond?
Yeah. It's interesting, and I think all of us can be challenged along the way with that. I at times think to myself, am I being too conservative and old-fashioned, and have to think a bit further? I still have not put underneath my signature that I am a she, her. It just doesn't fit well with me to have to go around and tell everyone that I'm a she, her. I still struggle with the language of them as well. I don't mind there being a group in our community who don't identify as female or male. I'm very respectful that people have the right to do what they want, but I just wish that we didn't change the English language to accommodate it, because I had a 14-year-old who went out with a them, and he would say to us, then wants to come home for dinner on Sunday night, is that okay? And my husband and I are thinking, so is that the young woman's mother and father and herself? So we're catering for three, and he'd be like, no, I'm just talking about the person, them. I was like, well, come on, how do we know? That's a plural. I don't know what you're talking about. So I'm very conscious of those sorts of things, and yet for that young person, not being classified as female was extremely important for them. So I just wish we could find another way of using language. I think we have to be more open around how we address some of these issues, so it doesn't matter if you're male or female in the gendered sense of it. I also find that a little bit hard at times when I have public toilets that are male and female toilets and them toilets, because then you don't have to say anything, it's just everybody. A unisex toilet. I don't always like the fact that I'm a girl and I think, gee, I can tell there's been a name. There's a few dribbles on the floor, which I would like to not have to deal with. That sort of side of it where I go, really, do I have, you can't just have a female So these are the realities, but in the scheme of things, while they can be an annoyance, they can be an irritant, they're not big deals. And I don't think we want to get caught up in the big deals at all. We are who we are. I think in a respectful, kind society, we respect anyone for whoever they are. Unless, even those who have done wrong in the world, you hope if they can come to a realisation they've done wrong, that they too deserve some respect. If they don't, like Donald Trump, then you do not have to respect them at all.
Lara, over here.
Sorry, Ben.
Very quick, because we're running out of time. You were the best arts minister we've ever had.
So important. Music, arts, they are critical. As much as the environment is, as much as having healthy waters and all the rest of it, the arts are so important for our mental health and well-being. And to me, it doesn't matter what it is. I could do a whole nother lecture just on the importance of the arts.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Lara. So many things you said resonated with me, as I'm sure they did with everybody, not just the women in this room, hopefully. Whenever I saw you from afar as Premier, and I'll now start talking about your Treasurer role as well, which I did from Queensland on the news, you always appeared incredibly confident. And I think your comments about walking into a room and being confident are excellent, and certainly on the U3A committee we'll be discussing a few of the comments that you've made. And certainly a standing invitation to come back and talk about arts. Wonderful. Thank you.